Hello, I'm Ann Hoiberg. I'm a member of Pace Television Productions, and I host a show on world peace and the United Nations. Today we're going to be discussing the situation in Venezuela, and we'll also be talking about the relationship of the United States with Cuba and with Venezuela. My guest today is Lilia Velasquez. She is an immigration attorney. She's a human rights activist. She teaches law, and she's a world traveler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Anne. It's always a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, thank you. Let's start out by talking about Venezuela. Where is Venezuela? So many people seem to be clueless where this country is. And I also am curious why you went to Venezuela.
Well, let me tell you first why I went to Venezuela. I was invited by the Global Exchange, and I'm sure you know about the Global Exchange because you travel with them as well. We go on socially responsible vacations. They're called reality tours. And it's really for people to open up their eyes and to go to a country that is in turmoil, where perhaps in the United States we're not getting accurate information, and to really see the reality of the people there, and to document our findings, and then come back to the United States and report on what we saw, what they told us, and how we feel about the situation in that country. You probably read in the newspapers, Ann, that there has been this massive black propaganda campaign against Venezuela. It is no secret that the United States does not like President Hugo Chavez. And there's tension between the two countries. Certainly President Chavez feels that I am the president of this sovereign nation and I can rule, and he believes in the programs that he has, and the United States does not agree with its regime, with his style, with his persona, and therefore there's constant attacks against Venezuela.
Now, where is Venezuela?
Venezuela is, if you go down through Central America, and then as you enter South America, is on the northern part of South America, and the border is with Colombia and with Brazil. And so it's the very first country that you will find as you enter into South America. It is a beautiful, beautiful country. I was just completely impressed. We went into the countryside as well. It was green, it was lush, it was fresh. And so we got to see how the life is in the provinces as opposed to life in Caracas, which is, the most dense city in the country.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that there seems to be a campaign against Venezuela. What is the basis of this? Is this sort of the curse of oil, seeing Venezuela does have oil and the United States needs oil?
Well, I think that definitely that is part of the equation as to why we have the struggle between the two countries. But I think that the primary basis is the fact that the United States does not like what President Chavez has done with the oil in terms of the sale prices, because now it has been nationalized. And so it is the national government that controls the reserves, and they decide also as to how much they're going to sell that oil for. And certainly the United States would like that oil to be privatized and to have better terms in terms of the purchase of that oil. 60% of the oil from Venezuela comes to the United States. So, and it is for the United States, it is the fourth largest provider of oil.
Well, you would think that we would try to be very, very friendly with President Hugo Chavez. What is he like? Is he a charismatic leader, or I think we need to know more about this man.
Well, Ann, I think it depends on who you talk to. You have people in the country that are clearly pro-Chavez 100%. And then you have another segment of the population that would talk to you for hours about how horrible he is and how the country is in shambles because of him. So you have two clearly distinct groups depending on who you talk to. Now, if you talk to the middle and upper class, those will be definitely people that will be anti-Chavez.
Now, why is that?
Well, they see him as a threat, the fact that he's helping the poor. He changed the situation for them. Many of them had great jobs, and now maybe they don't. And in terms of businesses, so they feel very much threatened by the idea of socialism and the fact that he's this Robin Hood of a president that wants to take from the rich and then give to the poor. Now, when you talk to the poor in Venezuela, tears come to your eyes.
Really?
Because I have never seen a group of people so impassioned, so devoted, so much in tune with what the country is doing. They not only love President Chavez, they worship him.
Really?
And people on the street would tell you that they would die for him any minute and that they're ready to defend our country if the U.S. or any other power were to attack them. So you see the social movement of people that for the first time they have a voice in politics. They carry a copy of their Constitution,
Really?
rich and poor, and they quote you articles verbatim from the Constitution. They have it in their pockets. I saw a woman that was wearing it as a necklace, saying, I am in touch with my Constitution. I know my rights. And the poor, the reason why they like Chavez so much is because for the first time he is giving them a face. And he is trying to include them in the everyday political life of Venezuela. And even the opposition, when you finally pin them down, he says, okay, I know you don't like Chavez, but can you mention one thing that you do like about Chavez? And they say, yes. He has completely revolutionized the people and made them politically aware. Everyone now knows about the politics. Everybody talks about the politics and the government and what programs they should have and what programs they shouldn't have. And the other thing that they also give credit to him is for the Misión Adentro, which is the medical care provided by the missions, where Chavez brought 20,000 doctors from Cuba and put them to work in the poorest areas in Caracas.
Now, when you say mission, what does that mean? We have our own feeling of what a mission is. Are you talking about like a project?
It's a project, it's a program, and that's what he calls them. He calls them missions, and they're like over a dozen missions. The most popular one, of course, is Mission Adentro, inside the neighborhood, where you have this medical doctor from Cuba they have built a little apartment for him. The bottom part is the clinic where he provides the services. And the top part is where he lives or she lives. And so the people from the neighborhood have free access to medical care, especially preventative medical care, when they go to that clinic. The doctors also pay home visits. Imagine that. You're poor
That's
and
a concept.
you're poor and the doctor comes to your house if you're ill. So even the opposition has recognized that those two things have really benefited the country as a whole.
Do the local doctors who grew up in Venezuela resent this?
There is tension. There's definitely tension. But my understanding is, and I don't know this for a fact, that when Chavez wanted to implement this Mission Adentro, he called on Venezuelan doctors to participate in the program, and that only a dozen volunteered. And that's when he realized that they were now willing to be providing those cheap medical services, and therefore he had to bring doctors from Cuba.
Now you're painting a picture where Hugo Chavez is definitely helping the people. And yet, here in the United States, we have a televangelist who is calling for the assassination of this man. And our Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, publicly states that Chavez is a negative force in the region. I'm sure our viewers are as confused as I am. Can you clarify what's going on where we have these two contrasting pictures?
Well, I think that when you have a president like Chavez who's very powerful and very, very independent, and who is very protective of the oil that he has, which is, of course, the greatest resource, natural resource that Venezuela has, and is actually not playing ball with the United States, so to speak, and is saying, here are the terms, the rules have changed, oil has been nationalized, and this is what we're willing to do in terms of selling oil to the United States. So you have a president that is standing up to one of the biggest countries in the world. And after all, it's only South America. After all, it's only a country of 25 million people. And therefore, this is unthinkable. No, this just doesn't happen, very often. And so I think it's just the fact that is different, the fact that Hugo Chavez is standing up and saying, I'm not going to succumb. You're not going to put Venezuela in your pocket, United States. And I am my own country, and I'm going to rule the country the best way that I see fit. And it is the United States that does not like the regime, the style, and the fact that President Chavez is leftist and socialist. I think that those two words really sum up the reason why we see Chavez as a potential threat to the region. Why? Because we not only have Chavez, we also have the neighbor in Brazil,
That's right.
which is even a bigger country. And we have also parts of socialism in Argentina. And now Mexico may come on board if Andrés Manuel López Obrador gets elected by Mexico, also with the same leanings towards helping the poor and helping the elderly and having a society or democracy that is more participatory and not just a representative democracy, but people actually participate. And so when you take sort of this domino effect, this ripple effect of socialism in that region, then the United States says, ooh, we have to stop this man.
Wait a minute. Now, you also mentioned that Chavez has placed into society various programs. What is he doing education-wise? I know he's the son of two local school teachers, so I'm sure education is important to him. Are peasants still illiterate, or what has he done to benefit them?
Well, I would say that is his number one, the most successful program. It is the Mission Robinson, where he, thanks to that program, over 1.4 million people, adults, have learned to read. And something that was very touching to me is to hear from a grandmother who told us that her dream was to be able to hold a pencil in her hand and be able to write her name. And now she could write her name on the board. And there were tears in her eyes. And it meant so much to her that now she felt so empowered, something so simple as being able to read and write. And now she had access to this education, even though she was an elderly woman, and she was the happiest person that you could see. And so when you see the numbers and the statistics, that now we have already 1.4 million people that know how to read, those people will then go into higher education and then participate in the economy of the country and hopefully then bring the employment rates up. And certainly that's what we want. We want those citizens to be able to participate and to contribute to the betterment of their society.
What is the job situation, and what is the poverty level in Venezuela? It seems to me it's quite high.
I've seen the figures that it's probably as high as 80%, which is clearly unacceptable. The unemployment rate is about 16%, which is also high.
Did you say 16?
16%. So it's also a very high unemployment rate. Now, you have to consider also, when I say 16%, that a large segment of the labor force is in the informal sector. People that are self-employed, they have little stands, they sell things, they have their own little businesses, the cooperatives, and so they're not part of the mainstream labor society where they're getting, the benefits, the medical insurance, and so on. So I think that even the 16% unemployment rate, could go up if you were not to consider the people that are employed in the informal sector. So it is something that is of concern. Obviously the country of Venezuela has gone through so many developments in the last few years. We had the oil strike.
When was that?
That was
Lilia?
in 2002.
2002.
2002, and it's basically to put pressure on the president to resign. So eventually, after nine weeks, it ended, and the strikers felt defeated because they couldn't get the president to resign. Then we had the failed coup attempt
And
in
when
April,
was that?
April 2002.
Mhm.
Again, trying to get rid of Chavez, and just the opposite took place. He was back into power 48 hours later because the people demanded him back. You could see people coming from the hills by the millions saying, we want our president back. And he came back within 48 hours. So it was the shortest coup in the history of the world. And we also had, after that, the recall referendum. So
And when was that?
That was in 2003, in 2004, that we had the recall referendum. And also you had an outpouring of support. 58% of the people re-elected Chavez. And so I think that after the recall referendum, it strengthened his position and his presidency, that the people need him, the people want him. Now, something that is very interesting, and I found this somewhat amusing, is that when we spoke to someone from the opposition, we asked, well, what about the fact that the people voted? I mean, overwhelmingly they voted for Chavez. And they said, well, yeah, but it was the poor people that voted for him. And I go, so the poor people's vote should not count? Or, we should not be too impressed by the fact that the majority of the people who are the poor voted for him. So it's just an attempt to find an excuse that certainly the wealthier people did not want him.
So they're very threatened by the change that he's bringing to that country.
It's a huge change. It's a huge change.
Do you feel any vibrancy, like there's a revolution going on?
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, it's contagious. It's very, here I am only 10 days in Venezuela, and already I'm chanting with the masses, Hugo no se va, Hugo is not leaving. And it's just sort of the spirit. You do feel like you're part of the process, and so you see the social revolution. But it's again, this raising the consciousness of the people and give them a political voice and political participation in the country that has really made the difference.
And the revolution is called?
The Bolivarian Revolution. Revolución Bolivariana, named after Simón Bolívar.
Do you think that Chavez emulates Bolivar?
I think that certainly Simón Bolívar is a role model for Hugo Chavez, and the fact that, that is the name of the Constitution as well.
Really?
Oh, yes. So we have the Constitution. It's called Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. So, and again, is to emulate and to say we can do the same. We can empower the masses. We can include the poor into the mainstream. And so he feels that he's sort of a maverick, and he's going to change the rules completely, and that some people are not going to like it.
Well, what about the shanty towns? Aren't there still shanty towns in Venezuela? How are the poor people living?
We went, in fact, to quite a few of those barrios, the shanty towns, and it is very depressing. It is very depressing. No matter where you go, whether it's Brazil or Mexico, you always feel this horrible sense that, my God, I am so privileged, and how can people live under such conditions? Even when you have a social revolution, you cannot change the dynamics between the poor and the rich. It's not like the rich have become poor and the poor have become more well off. It doesn't happen overnight. The same with South Africa after they ended apartheid.
Yes.
Well, the people still live, right?
Yes.
In Soweto, and they're still poor.
Yes.
Because it is going to take a long time for the change to really make a difference, or for us to really see the difference. That the poor people that didn't know how to read and write now can. Now they can go into higher education. How long is that going to take them? A few years? How many more years before they can enter into the mainstream labor market? Another few years.
That probably explains why there aren't very many women in political office. They only have 9.7% representation in their National Assembly.
Not a good record. Not a good record, absolutely. But, what I see is that the missions, and we have so many of them, is the women who run the missions.
And that's very typical of Cuba also, where the Federation of Cuban Women pretty much run the show in all of the neighborhoods.
The women are in charge in the neighborhoods.
Yes.
And it has to do, at least they acknowledge, that women tend to be more sensitive. They tend to be more compassionate. They tend to empathize more with people's problems. And therefore, they are the best candidates to tend to those needs. But at the same time, we do appreciate this vote of confidence for women in those positions. They also need to promote women, to train women, to, to enter the world of politics, the world of high administration, to be at the decision-making table. So it is not good to say women are only good for running the missions. We want them in all stratas of society.
Well, Cuba's done quite well elevating women into political office. It's now at 36% in Cuba. And I'm sure it came out of that Federation of Cuban Women working in the neighborhoods.
And I believe that it will happen in Venezuela as well. I think that the social revolution with Hugo Chavez has woken women up.
Mm-hmm.
They're more aware. They want to be involved. And they see an opportunity for the first time to reach higher office, to be part of the decision making, with the big guys. And because we spoke with the women who were at the district attorney's office, for example, and those were the women in power. And so we did see women, but again, the statistics, tell a different story that they need to do better than that.
Are women equally enrolled in the universities? I think they are.
Yeah, they are. You do have gender balance, of course, but it's more of a social status type of situation. Rather than gender, is who has access, who has the money to go into higher education, into the good schools.
But education for K through 12 is free, right?
Completely free.
Is it compulsory?
It's compulsory. It's compulsory. Of course, sometimes, parents, they're so poor, and they tell the kids, well, don't go to school. It's not like they're going to put the parents in jail.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it's compulsory, it doesn't mean that it's going to be enforced 100%.
Now, Chavez has quite a strong relationship with Fidel Castro, and I'm sure that's another irritant to the United States government. How do you see that relationship? Is Fidel Castro a role model, or how do you view that?
I think that Hugo Chavez looks up to Fidel Castro, not so much necessarily for the policies, because you do see the results. When you have 100% literacy rate in Cuba, when you have free medical care for everyone in Cuba. So those are things that are very impressive,
Mm-hmm.
for any of us. But at the same time, I think is the fact that Fidel Castro, like Hugo Chavez, is not going to let the United States be the bully.
Mm-hmm.
And to say, this is what I want you to do, Venezuela, or this is what I want you to do, Cuba. After almost 40 years of an embargo against Cuba, Fidel is still there. And I think that Hugo Chavez respects that.
Now, you mentioned human rights and women's rights. How does Venezuela rack up when it comes to human rights violations?
Well, I think that we went to an office that it was called a network of support. And it was like an Amnesty International type of office where they do document human rights violations. The homicide rate in Venezuela is very high.
Very high.
It's about 12,000 per year.
Mm-hmm.
And about 1%, or no, 10% is done by the police.
Really?
Yes. And so it's something that is of great concern for the country and for the district attorney's office, that they do need to train the police officers. And mostly what they do is that the police will kill a criminal and say, well, I did it in self-defense. I thought my life was in danger.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's always the issue. Are they trigger happy? Are they just too quick to kill someone? Or do they really need to respect human life? So they're investigating, those incidents of, corruption and also police brutality and homicide.
We haven't talked much about corruption. Is that a problem in Venezuela?
Yes, yes, of course it is. It is a problem in most of the South American countries, and I have traveled to almost all of them, whether it's Bolivia, Peru, Argentina, Mexico, there's corruption. And we have to keep something in mind, that even though Chavez fired thousands of people that were working for the oil company, PDVSA, there are many, many more that remained. It's not as if with the change in precedent that you are going to have a completely new slate of people working at all levels of the government. It doesn't happen. You change the people of confidence, you change the people close to you, but the rest will stay in their same jobs. And so it's not like you can clean house from top to bottom and say, good, now we have good, clean, law-abiding officers. It doesn't happen. And so they really need to continue to fight against corruption.
We're coming to the end of our program, which seems hard to believe. And I just want to talk a little bit about what do you see are the challenges?
Well, to me, the challenges, of course, would be, number one, they have to clearly, if not eradicate corruption, they need to bring it to a tolerable level. It is way, way too high at the present time. And more importantly, they need to bring the employment figures up. People need to be employed, because if they have jobs, if they generate enough jobs, then people will feel happy and content and will be more in a position to contribute to society.
What would you say is our final word on Venezuela and its relationship to the United States in just 20 seconds?
I think that we have to wait and see, and I'm a bit concerned. Pat Robertson's statements that we should go and, and kill Hugo Chavez is very, very troubling, and it's reprehensible. And certainly, instead of backfiring against, it has really solidified Hugo Chavez, because now everybody thinks that, oh, they're going to come to get him.
That is